doing your best to get out of your head. As you know, in the whole yogic tradition and old ancient Buddhist texts, there's this concept of the monkey mind. And that's the idea that our thoughts, like a monkey, swing from tree to tree. And our thoughts can be very repetitive and not helpful. And so we have to tame the monkey mind. And so much of the problems that happen in relationships is because people get in their heads and they don't communicate. And what they do is that their bodies first build up a resistance. So it's a mental and a physical resistance to their partner.
Greetings and welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. I am Espen, your host, and today I'm joined by Jillian Turecki. This is going to be a great conversation about relationships, about love, about self-love, about boundaries, about how to interact with the people that we love and the people in our environment. And it's going to be a really powerful opportunity to learn more about how we can step into that real, authentic relationship, not just others, but with also the self. Jillian Turecki is a certified relationship coach. She's a teacher, she's an author, and she's a host of the podcast. I've been listening to this podcast. You should definitely write this down. It's called Jillian on Love. I love that. So check out Jillian on Love. It's fueled by her insatiable work to realize and to understand, as I say, what makes relationships thrive. She's helped thousands of people now for over 20 years with her teachings and her writings to revolutionize relationships to themselves and transform their intimate relationship as well. She's sought after for her compassionate, direct, and authentic style of coaching. And if you check out her on Instagram and you look at some of the lives, you'll probably pick up exactly what I'm sharing here. So I want to say a special welcome to the show. Jillian, how are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me and for that lovely intro.
It's an absolute pleasure. As I said, I have been following your work myself and been reading up about some of the stuff that you teach. And I think it's so pertinent today. We're in the start of 2025. And I think for me, a lot of people are realizing that there is much more to relationships and to love than what we might have been taught growing up. And I've really enjoyed some of your videos as well, talking about, trauma from childhood and how these things can be stored in the unconscious or subconscious mind and how they play out in our intimate relationships, now that we're potentially, adults. So I want to ask you, where did your journey start and why did you decide to specialize in relationships and in love?
So I would say it started about almost 26 years ago when I discovered yoga. I was just always fascinated by the mind-body connection. And I think with anyone who really gravitates towards the practice of yoga is seeking some sort of truth, seeking some sort of understanding of self, understanding of the world. And so a few years into practicing yoga, I just knew that I had to teach it. Like this was my path. And so that's what I did. And I taught it for many years, close to 20 years I taught it. And I would say like maybe 7 years into teaching it, I just had this feeling that I wanted more. Like I worked with a lot of people on their physical pain. And what I realized is that there was a relationship between their emotions and their physical pain. And that if their marriage if they were having a fight with their spouse or if they were having relationship problems, I would notice how that would show up in their practice as either just fatigue, stiffness, back pain. And so I did notice that when I would go over to these people's homes and I would help them with their physical bodies, that I was actually helping them with their relationship with themselves and with others. And so I always knew that I wanted to do something more with teaching, but the ceiling back then for teaching yoga was very low.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you could back then it wasn't about going on Instagram. This is before Instagram. Going on Instagram and becoming or on YouTube. It was before that time. And so I had this ache to do something more, but I didn't know what. And then I also wanted to have babies and get married and go through that whole route. And so I met the man who would become my husband and then later my ex-husband. And it was a really painful marriage. It only lasted 2 years. I would say leading up to the marriage, before we got married, our relationship was 90% great and 10% really problematic. And you might say no relationship is perfect, but that 10% was very, very problematic. And so the marriage was extremely painful. I felt helpless. I felt victimized. I felt scared, all of it. The way he ended it was terrible. And then at the same time, I was going through a lot of loss. My mom was dying of cancer. I went through a miscarriage. So that time in my life, which is now when it all ended, was about exactly 10 and a half years ago. I entered a very dark, deep night of the soul. And I became obsessed with this question. What the hell does it take to make a relationship work? Why am I in this situation? What am I missing? And in my quest to understand what happened, and also my quest to feel better, because I also was very nervous. I didn't know if I was going to make it, like, emotionally. I just went into this deep dive journey into relationships and love and male and female psychology, and I had mentors and I went to school for it, and there's no way that I would even want to be with my ex-husband. So I think that us splitting apart had a significance that was bigger than us, like it was meant to be that we would split up. However, we got terrible help. The couples work that we did was bad. It was bad. And I thought to myself, there has to be another way for couples to get help. And I figured out what was missing from my view. And so I started to work a lot with couples. And then I really wanted to work with individuals going through divorce or heartbreak, and then singles. And so that's how it all began. And then, I was approached to write a book, and I thought, you know what? I have to, because I've worked with thousands of people, and that's not a brag. That's literally like, I sacrificed a lot of things in my life because I wanted to work with so many people so that I could become an expert, because you can't become an expert at anything unless you do it like thousands of times. And so I've learned a lot, not only from my own experience, but from all these other people's experiences. And I've learned things that are not out there, that's missing, that people don't know, that we're not taught in school.
Not taught in school. I think this is an entire interview in itself. I couldn't agree more. And it's nothing like the school of life, the school of hard knocks to give us that lesson. I'm very interested in what you're sharing here, because my background is as a yoga teacher as well. And I realized as I now teach, there are a lot of issues in the tissues. There's a lot of psychosomatic emotions and wounding that's stored in the body. And I feel
Yeah.
this often comes out through triggers. And I want to ask you this question. When you went through that experience and you sought help and you went to professionals, did you experience, you mentioned, like bad advice? For me, I think, and not to talk about any systems or outdated models, but of my personal experience is that the modern or standard model of psychology is really outdated. I mean, I know clients and patients of mine that have gone to the same psychologist for 15 years talking about how they're a victim of what happened.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Not
saying,
helpful.
isn't it? And so I'm not
No.
saying that, the anything is good about it, right or wrong, but I'm just questioning the model in general, because what I've realized now is that here we have someone like you who's amassed a huge following. You've published a book. You've got hundreds of thousands of people following you. You're getting great results with the work that you're doing, and you're a yoga teacher. And so sometimes for me, also going from being a yoga teacher to being a physician, I took a lot of those teachings with me. And I know
Mhm.
that that's the backbone of so much of what we do. So can you tell me, what do you feel now are some of the tools and methodologies, or maybe hypotheses or belief systems that you've applied in your teachings that's had the greatest effect on a relationship to self and a relationship to others?
Well, one is, if we're talking about the mind body connection, is being connected to your body, and that doing your best to get out of your head, as in the whole yogic tradition and old ancient Buddhist texts, there's this concept of the monkey mind. And that's the idea that our thoughts, like a monkey, swing from tree to tree, and our thoughts can be very repetitive and not helpful. And so we have to tame the monkey mind. And so much of the problems that happen in relationships is because people get in their heads and they don't communicate. And what they do is that their bodies first build up a resistance. So it's a mental and a physical resistance to their partner. And as that happens, resentment starts to build, and then their sex life starts to decline. And then they're not even motivated to meet each other's needs. And this is all because we don't learn communication. And because communication is both a science and an art. And to communicate well in a romantic situation is very nuanced. And so this idea of connecting to the body, connecting to your breath, people who aren't so emotionally articulate. And what I mean by that is they feel something, but they don't know how to describe what they're feeling, but they can describe what they're experiencing in their body, or they can locate it in their body. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I would say is accountability, that if anything is not working in life, that it's not about, oh, something's not working in your life, you're to blame. It's something's not working in your life. Let's see how you can be the change that you wish to see in your life. And so what's missing a lot, I think, is this idea of taking radical responsibility. And also, you can't separate the mind and the body, and that we get in our heads and we create all these stories, and then it builds resentment. And this is really the reason why most relationships end.
Oh, that's amazing. Quickly, your top 3 tools for someone to apply right now. Obviously, they want to check out your podcast and read your book and so on. But where
Yeah.
can someone start right now to improve their relationship to self and a relationship to others?
So, number one, if you're not moving your body, move your body. If you're really accustomed to moving your body and you're still not feeling well, maybe you need to move it a little bit differently.
Mm.
Maybe you have to incorporate breath or do something that's going to actually regulate your nervous system versus just make you exhausted. Number two, get very acquainted with your needs. Understand your needs. And everyone has the need to feel safe. Everyone. But what makes you feel safe is not necessarily what makes me feel safe. So you have to understand that you have a need to feel safe, but you need to know what you need to feel safe, and you need to be able to meet that need. Everyone has the need to have some adventure in life. People need love and connection. They need community. They need growth. So figure out what's missing in your life and what need you could be meeting in a better way. Like when we look at our lives and we're like, oh, what's missing? So let's say someone might say, well, I'm missing community. Okay. So what need would community meet? Well, it would meet connection and validation and camaraderie and love. So let's think of ways how to meet your needs. So this is very, very, very important. It's a way to understand your psychology. It's a way to make it so that you feel like you can really have your own back in life. And I think that's incredibly important. It's also really important because no one is perfect going into a relationship. No one is 100% whole. That does not exist. We all have pain and wounds, but we can have pain and we can have wounds and we can have areas that feel like, gaps in our system, and we can still have a strong sense of self. And relationships really thrive when two people have a sense of self, like they know who they are, even if they're still in the road of discovery, as we always are. They fundamentally know who they are, and they know what they need. So figure that out. So moving the body, knowing what you need. And then the third thing is learn how to communicate, whether that's picking up books, whether that's listening to podcasts, whether that's taking some classes. Learn how to communicate effectively in the most difficult of circumstances.
One of the things that we do really well at this podcast is that we actually deploy little takeaway strategies and little coaching activities, right? So what
Okay.
Jillian just said, first is movement. Okay. Second is get to know your needs. What are your core primary needs for you to feel safe? And then the third one.
Yeah, for you to feel safe, for you to feel connected, also for you to feel like life is good, And then the third one is learn your communication skills.
Communication. Now, where would you start with communication? Because I think a lot of people feel like that's just about saying things with their words. But let's say that you're in an intimate relationship, and we all are. Maybe it's not an intimate as such, but maybe it's intimate with our family or loved ones. How do we know that we're communicating effectively? Is it observing body language? Is it tonality? Is it rawness and realness and vulnerability? How do we know if you're communicating open-hearted and effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. So communication is not just with words. We are non-verbally communicating all the time. Our body language is saying all the time whether we like something or don't like something, our tone, our cadence. You can say I hate you to someone and have it be flirtatious and cute, or you can say I hate you to someone and have it mean you hate them. It's all in the tone and in the body language. So I would say social skills are really the most important thing that most of us are lacking. And we are continuing to lack them even more because everything is done, through technology. So get good at getting to know the people in your life better. And the way that you would do that is asking really good questions. And some examples of good questions is, instead of how are you, you can say, when was the last time you laughed so hard you almost peed yourself? What was happening? Or when was the last time you stayed up all night and what was it that kept you up all night? When was the last time you had an amazing time, and you felt really connected? What was happening? You want to be curious about the people you care about. You want to express that curiosity in the types of questions you ask. And the questions are meant to provoke a story. So in other words, you want to hear someone share something about themselves that gives you a window into who they are and what matters to them. And that's how you develop social skills. Yeah.
Okay, so listeners, viewers, if you want to, you can pause this right now, go ahead and write down those questions, sit down with your loved ones, ask to create an open and safe space, and then ask those pre-prepared questions and get to know them better. And also potentially they can ask you some similar questions as well. I think this is really important. Dylan, I want to ask you, one of my old mentors used to say, when you meet someone special, and I always say, we don't call them the one that's special, we call them the one that's special to the level that we're at, consciousness wise. But my old mentor used to say, when you meet someone special, be sure to meet their parents and discern their relationship with their parents. And then you'll kind of get what you have to work with, or, what some of the challenges might
Yeah.
be. And in one of my past relationships, myself and my ex-partner, we were so in love. Incredible woman. Everything was wow, sparkles and just incredible connection. But there was a deep trauma bond there. And so I want to ask, where do you feel and what have you seen over the years in terms of, as I mentioned, people often say, I want to call in the special one. I want to have my dream man, my dream woman. And I say, you don't call in a special one, you call in the one special to the level that you're at. If you look at the levels of consciousness, if you have a trauma and something that you haven't dealt with, if you're passive submissive, you might call in the narcissist. If you're a narcissist, you might call in the passive submissive and so on.
Mhm.
So I just want to check, what are your thoughts on that in terms of intimate relationships and how they are very good, probably the best at triggering us and challenging us. Beautiful sometimes for growth and development, but also sometimes maybe as a sign that we're not meant to be in that relationship. What are your thoughts on all the above?
Well, there's a lot that you just brought up. There's
Uh-huh.
like five different directions we can go. As far as calling in the one, and I agree that we kind of are drawn to and attract into our lives people with a similar level of consciousness. Get very clear about who you want to be, but who do you have to be in order to be in that relationship? A lot of the times we don't really turn the mirror back to us and say, okay, am I someone who that special someone would want to be with? What do I have to actually change? Or what do I have to develop inside myself in order to even sustain a relationship with that person? So that's number one. Number two, when it comes to calling in the one, you really have to get very clear about your priorities. What's going to be the right person for you? Not necessarily the right person necessarily on paper. What are some of the traits that they need to possess? What are some of the traumas that they need to not have in order for you to be in a healthy relationship? Relationships require a tremendous amount of tolerance and flexibility. No one is perfect. Anyone you fall in love with will eventually very much annoy you sometimes, and no one is perfect. So my motto is prioritize like 5 things that are absolutely non-negotiable for you based on understanding yourself and your psychology, and be open-minded and flexible about the rest. And you might find that when you're in a relationship that there's something happens that you didn't realize is something that you can't tolerate. So that's going to happen, but have some sort of understanding of that first. So that when it comes to like seeking someone who is right, and look, sometimes having that crazy chemical attraction in the beginning, sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's just not love. You need more information. And so you have to really think, what kind of relationship do I want? Some people really lean more towards dopamine, right? And so they are people who really value novelty. They like a lot of uncertainty. They like a lot of adventure. They want to travel. You'd be better off with someone who has those values too. If you're someone who's like, yes, I like to travel, but I don't want my life to be about traveling. I want my life to be more about family and building a nest and having strong family values, and maybe if there's any spiritual religious beliefs, that there's like every Friday night or every Sunday. So you have to understand like your values and what's really important to you in life. And ultimately you want to partner with someone who agrees mostly with you on what a life well lived is.
I love this. Top 5 boundaries, getting really clear on what that is and what we need, and then being flexible with everything around that. I think that's beautiful. And I think, for me, realizing this and having done a lot of coaching with people over the years, I think a lot of people have that in mind, but they have never actually written it down and been clear on how that would look in a
Yes.
relationship.
Yeah.
And Jillian, let me ask you now, heartbreak. I
Mm.
know this can come from many different forms.
Yes.
During the pandemic, a lot of people were separated, forced into separation. They were lonely. We saw, at least here in Australia, the suicide rates were 4 times that of the COVID deaths. And there was a big
Wow.
change to a lot of relationships. It was a really tough time for many people. And it was also a really great time because a lot of people were forced to stay in their homes and get to know their loved ones rather than
Yeah, yeah,
running away.
exactly. Exactly. Everyone had different experience. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So what
Yeah.
are your thoughts? How does one deal with and heal, go through gracefully and beautifully, if, where possible, heartbreak and heartache?
Well, first you need to know that you're gonna, in the beginning, not every breakup is created equal. Some are easier than others, but the ones that kind of really kind of bring you to your knees emotionally and maybe literally, you're gonna go a little mad. You're gonna feel a little crazy for a little while. And that's just part of the deal. One of the hardest things to do in life is to let go of someone who we don't want to let go of. But you have to. And so what you have to do is process your feelings, and that might be best with a therapist. Feel your feelings, surround yourself with loved ones, get involved in a project that is meaningful to you. It's a bumpy journey. It's very ugly at times. You're going to feel all sorts of things, but ultimately those are the core principles.
Hmm. Oh, that's gold right there. That's really nice. I think now when people are going through relationships, there's so many different kinds of relationships. And I have realized, I have to speak for myself, for quite a while, in many ways, I was looking outside of myself for answers. I had an accident in 2006 where I broke my legs, almost died from an infection. I was looking to the hospital surgeons and nurses and doctors and the drugs to heal me.
Wow.
Eventually, breath is the thing that made me keep both my legs. And then I feel like, as they kind of, and I'll paraphrase in quantum physics, everything around you is a projection, a reflection, a mirror of what's inside of you. And when I asked you a question before about relationships, the first thing you did was to turn the mirror around and say, how are you showing up in this? And how can you see this as in being part of your creation? I'd love to ask your thoughts on this, because for me, one of the greatest journeys that I've ever gone on is the journey home towards self-love. I realized that I was born and raised in a family where there was a lot of emotional suppression. Both my parents are alcoholics. There was not
Mm,
not a lot of emotional intimacy. So I grew up
mm,
very physically and mentally strong and very emotionally weak. And
mhm.
so I'd suppress a lot of these emotions. I'd keep people at a distance because I didn't feel safe to love. And as I continued my growth and development, I realized that, the quality of our life equals the quality of our emotions. And if we don't feel good on the inside, how can we expect to have an incredible life, let alone beautiful relationships? So
Yeah.
I had to turn it back in, and I had to look, how am I creating this in my life? How is this a reflection of me? How is this teaching me to love more? How is this teaching me boundaries? So I want to go into I think the most important conversation when it comes to relationships, which is the conversation about self-love. What are your thoughts?
Well, the way that I think of self love is self acceptance. And the way that I quantify self acceptance is that you have a healthy self esteem in spite of the fact that you have ambivalence towards certain parts of yourself. And I think that learning how to truly accept all the parts of ourselves, even though there are parts that we don't particularly like, is ultimately at the core of self worth and self esteem. And to me, that's that we're all tasked with that. Like, can you see yourself as valuable and worthy and deserving, even though you have parts to your personality or parts to you that are not awesome? And part of that is understanding that none of us are perfect, and all of us struggle with, we all have a dark side, and some people have larger dark side than others, and some people have no self-control and are scary and all of that. But we all have a dark side, and we all have had mean thoughts and jealous thoughts, and that's part of the human condition. We have to kind of straddle that very fine line between, oh, this is a behavior or habit or a pattern that I should be working on. that I need to work on, And also, there might be some things that are just, things that we're always going to struggle with. Can we hold ourselves in high regard in spite of that?
So acceptance is the first step, self-acceptance.
I've never known anyone to have a really difficult life. And I'm not talking about a difficult life in terms of the things that have happened in their life, but like they're just finding life very difficult, even if nothing is particularly happening. And I've, experienced that. Like every time I've experienced it, it's like nothing's really happening, but life is just feeling really hard. I'm not particularly feeling good about myself. It always kind of boils down to something like a disconnect to self, a rejection of part of the self, a denial or suppression of part of the self. And it's very important to self acceptance is very important because our relationships reflect how we think of ourselves.
Oh yeah, wow. Also, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write down the parts of me that I feel is the shadow side or the dark side, and
Mhm.
I'm going to learn to love and sit with those at a whole new level. This is really useful. I think we always can go deeper into the level of self acceptance
Yeah.
and self love in that way. I want to segue quickly and talk about emotions. So when I grew up, suppressed, very suppressed in emotions, alcoholic parents, never really talked about emotions. I do events mostly in Australia, but also around the world, and I get people that raise their hand, and I ask a question. I say, last month I had 300 people in the room for 3 days, and I said, how many of you grew up in a family where it was common to talk about emotions? And I'll get maybe five, six hands, 10 at the most.
Wow.
It's very interesting. And then I say,
Is
how
that
many
was that in Australia?
in Australia?
Is that partly cultural or no?
I would say that that has to do with it, yeah. But also, I would say it's, for me, what I've observed is that it's generational. So, for example, if I look at
Mhm.
my grandparents, it was extremely rare for them to talk about emotions
Yeah.
in where I'm born and raised in Norway. And then I look at my parents and it's similar. And I look at me and what's happening. And I came from that, but I'm learning. And I'm looking at the younger generations now, and they're learning the things that you're teaching. They're learning
Yeah.
about self love and acceptance and consciousness and all these things, movement you mentioned. And so I feel like there's the expansion of consciousness. And as we go through the different generations, we are awakening and we are healing. But from the old patterns, it seems that a lot of people have certainly not grown up in relationships or families where it's common to be
Right.
vulnerable and openly talk about emotions.
It's a funny thing, emotions. It's like talking about your emotions all day long is also very draining and exhausting, and I don't necessarily recommend that. But when we're talking about emotional intelligence, and it's very common for men to not be in touch with their emotions in the same way that women are. That's very, very common. I think it's a very positive thing if men are more in touch with that part of themselves. I think they become better partners, and I think they become happier men and
Yeah.
happier people. So I think it's very important. I think that for people listening right now, it's just what's interesting is to kind of figure out what was the role of emotions in your family? Like how were emotions treated? How was love expressed in the family?
Good
Was
question.
love expressed through words? Was it expressed through actions? How freely was that word used? Was there affection in the household or not so much affection? This is important because two people can fall in love and really love each other, but one person expresses love very differently than the other. Or, someone can get into an argument and they raise their voice, but to them, it's like, I don't know, maybe they grew up in an Italian family, for example. I had a friend who grew up in an Italian family. So, like, everything an Italian American family. And what was customary in that family is that you love loud, you argue loud, everything is sort of loud. That was her family. But she fell in love with someone where it's like, no, 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 you're supposed to be more reserved. And so helping them kind of find a middle ground was understanding that, like, when they're yelling, they're not actually yelling at you. That's just part of how they were raised. So learning each other's language of love and seeing
Mm.
if you can align on that and give to each other in that way, that's very important. So I think that that's what you need to understand in yourself. And then the second part I would say is, if that is how you were raised, do you want to continue that lineage, or do you want to learn how to do it differently?
Exactly. It ran
Yeah.
in the family until it ran into me.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Such a good saying. So
Mhm.
the reason why I brought this up, Jillian, is because when I grew up somewhat, or at least got older, I realized that I had suppressed a lot of emotions. And when I sat in meditation, I felt grief, I felt anger, I felt these things. And some of that came from my brother dying when I was 5, and
Mm.
other things, growing up in general. And
Yeah.
so I wanted really to learn about myself. After I finished as a physician, I took 2 years off and I traveled the world, and I sat, with plant medicine in the jungle and disappeared up into the mountains to sit with the Himalayan, masters in meditation and all sorts of things. And what I realized was, as I mentioned briefly before, what I came to feel is that the quality of my life equals the quality of my emotions. And so I did an emotional journal and I wrote down the primary emotions that I felt over 30 days. And then I could look at that and see that it would change depending on the different relationships that I was in, where I was in the world, and who I was interacting with, of course. But the thing that remained the same, the common denominator being myself, was that I felt enthusiastic and grateful, but I had a lot of anger in my life. And so then I got deeper into anger, and I realized anger is often an expression of sadness or grief. And
Yeah.
then I basically created a protocol to heal emotions. So we go through and heal fear, guilt, shame, grief, and so on and so forth. And what I found, Jillian, which is the reason why I bring it up, because you've got some extensive experience in the yogic lineage, I found that these different emotions blocks the different energy centers or the chakras. So I wanted just to kind of spin off a little bit and on the spiritual tangent and ask, what are your thoughts on emotions and overall prana and energy moving through the body? If we were to say that everything is energy, where does this fit into your curriculum and your hypothesis?
It's the same thing. It's the mind-body connection. I mean, the mind and the body is one. It's okay. So if you have a lot of anger, you could also experience a lot of physical heat in your body. Maybe you have a really strong solar plexus, but then it's a little bit too much. And then you feel like you get stuck in your gut. I mean, there's so many ways to go there in this conversation. Tension in the mind, tension in the emotions manifests as tension in the body. You can release the body to release the tension in the mind, and vice versa. They kind of work in tandem. So a lot of rage that's been sort of unrecognized, or it's suppressing sadness, can show up as so many different things. It could be stiffness in your hamstrings. It could be pain in your lower back. It could be gut issues. It could be skin issues. It can be all of that. And all of that is the blocking of energy inside of you. It could be the chronic neck pain. So I would just tell people that if they have this sort of inexplicable body pain, or if they're feeling sort of depressed or whatever it is, to really think about what else is going on in your life that maybe you're not paying attention to, and that you've been suppressing.
I love that. This reminds me of a story of an old patient of mine. She came in with severe neck pain, numbness and tingling down the arm. We sent her to the chiropractor who did treatments, massage therapist did treatments, the medical doctor did a full set of scans, blood tests, everything. And she started doing the therapies, the manual therapies. And over a period of about 6 weeks, there were some improvements. She was feeling better, but there was still a lot of tension around her neck. She still had sharp pain in the neck and also numbness and tingling down the arm. So I decided to change, and I decided to test the hypothesis, such as, is this an emotion stuck in the body? Is this unreleased tension or whatever?
Yeah.
And so I sat down and I asked her, because it was around the neck. So my thought was, okay, maybe we talk a little bit about the throat chakra and lack of self-expression. Let's have a look and see where this might play a role. Kind of just, work diagnosis by exclusion, really. And so I said to her, I asked her a question. I said, where are you not expressing yourself? Where are you not speaking and expressing your truth? And she looked at me like I had said something really weird. And then a second or two later, she goes, well, let me tell you, my husband and my work and blah and blah. And she just, right? And she just expressed herself. And you could see that it had been a long time since that had taken place. And so I kind of just put my Teflon on and held loving space. And 15 minutes, I said, great, let's have a little look at your neck. And, I was taking notes and listening and not responding much, but as we do, just kind of holding that space. And then I assessed her neck and barely touched her at all. I said, how do you feel? She goes, I feel great. She came back for the next treatment, neck pain completely gone.
There you go.
We did manual therapy for a long time. Different physicians, different practices, different applications, somewhat of a change. But when she had an expression and a release from that, area of energy, the pain reduced by 90%, and it remained that way. So then we obviously sent her to therapists and allowed her to continue to express. She went to a women's group and started to express there, and it really cleared the issue. It's very interesting how the body is kind of a barometer of the soul.
Well, yeah, 100%. The moral of the story is if you're having some physical symptoms and it's not, and none of the doctors can figure it out, and nothing's really helping, consider that it might be an emotional some sort of emotional or relationship issue that's going on in your life that is actually causing the pain.
I'm interested, because we look at the standard allopathic model, which I'm well trained in, but also wanted to leave the old model because we look at reality and through the five senses, and we say, oh yeah, this is a physical reality. It's not a physical reality. We know that through quantum physics. This is about energy, and it's about how we interact with our own energy and with the field around us. And so I think if we look at the model and we try to fix everything from a physical perspective, we're going to be working with a very, very limited amount of our potential. And so I'm interested, not necessarily being able to provide a percentage, but what would you say, what percentage of physical pain or disease would stem from either trapped emotions, unresolved emotions or traumas, or a lack of self-love?
I don't know the percentage, but I do believe that I personally believe that everything can have a source in some sort of something emotional for sure. But I can't claim that, I can't claim the percentage. But what I can say is that, as I said before, a tense mind creates a tense body. And a tense body can create a tense mind too. Like you could hurt yourself physically, like legitimately like hurt yourself. And then that creates a lot of tension in the brain. But I have seen it over and over and over again. And there's a lot of physical tension that comes with resentment. There's a lot of physical tension that comes with low self-worth. And that's why moving your body is so important, because it does tend to clear these things. Moving your body tends to make you feel better. You might need more of a intervention to really see like what is actually going on. I mean, I can't even, it's countless times that I've seen people struggling with a key relationship in their life, and they can't get up in the morning because they're so exhausted, and then they think they have chronic fatigue syndrome, and really what's happening is something emotional.
Yeah, and their body's telling them to change something.
To change something.
Change
Yeah. Yeah.
something. Like
Yeah.
I say the body never makes a mistake. If your body's telling you something,
I
listen
know.
and
Yeah.
learn
Yeah.
and observe. And
Yes.
how's this happening for me? What is it trying to teach me and show me?
But this idea of the body and mind being one is really sort of, it's only now getting the credit that it deserves. The work of Dr. Sarno, I mean, he's been doing it for years, healing back pain. Now you have Joe Dispenza, you have, the book, The Body Keeps the Score. So now we're starting to see how our mental state affects our physical state.
Oh, I love this connection, and I think it's so critical. And again, I say to my students, I used to say this when I was teaching yoga as well. I remember I was teaching a class, and this one guy is going into an asana, and he falls out of the posture, and he goes, and swears and says, yeah.
Yeah.
And you could see that he's in self-judgment. And so I
Yes.
said, I just stopped the class, and I said, hey, just take a moment, just stand in Tadasana, let's have a chat. And I said, hey, imagine if you observe a child and the child is learning to walk, and then the child falls over, and then you point and you say, you're so stupid you can't even walk,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then you do that to yourself in this practice. When you fall out of your pose, you judge your body. You say, oh, my bloody hip, or this freaking knee. And so
Yeah.
you create that judgment within your field, and then you expect yourself to be motivated to go back to another class. I said, next
Yeah.
time you fall out of a posture, just go, yes. Just like you would celebrate a child falling when they're learning to walk. You
Yeah.
would go, oh, that's so amazing. You fell over. Do it again. Give yourself that level of compassion and acceptance and grace in your class, and celebrate yourself when you fall out, because it's not about the perfect pose. It's about continuing to show up. And that
Yes.
had a huge impact on my students, because now we created this beautiful, joyful energy in the practice when, they fall out of a posture and they kind of go, yes, and they celebrated each other and
Oh,
kind of
that's cute.
laugh a bit.
That's lovely. I love that.
It
Yeah,
was
that's
just a
lovely.
reframe, it was just a reframe, because
Mhm.
I think so often, like, I remember, like, I had back pain. I was like, oh, this bloody back. Excuse me. You just cursed a part of your body that has served you your entire life, and it is currently speaking to you and asking for help, and you're judging it. So I think
Yeah,
sometimes we change the language. What are your thoughts?
100%. It's a very powerful reframe. These are like the small habits that we fall into that kind of like feeds the bucket of misery, you know?
Yeah.
It's like it's really always the little things, these little kind of like habits, these ways in which we're very hard on ourselves or so focused on the achievement, and it's this negative, we can fall into these patterns of negativity. And I think it's interesting because it's just one of the ways in which we can look at ourselves and say, oh, how am I contributing to what it is that I don't want to feel anymore?
Great question. I
Yeah.
love questions. I love
Yeah.
questions. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, I got two last questions for you. Okay. I
Sure.
want to talk about your book. So this book is called It Begins With You.
Yes.
And it has, one, how to break the patterns, the painful patterns that's blocking true love and healthy love. And then it goes into step number 2, raising your self-worth. Step number 3, how to literally improve your love life. And step number 4 is how to stand up for yourself. Yeah, and it includes the 9 hard truths about love that will change your life. This book is called It Begins With You. What will someone obtain or receive or experience from reading this book, Julian?
Well, I think that they will have a lot more information about themselves. I think that they will break some serious patterns if they really adopt some of these truths. And I'm hoping that they feel inspired and empowered to, for that person who maybe feels like, oh, it'll never happen for me, or my relationship will never get better, or whatever it is, because it's for people with all relationship statuses, that they feel like, wow, I actually now have tools. I now have things that I can actually do
Hmm.
to create change, because the theory is important, but you also need the steps. And so I'm really hoping that people feel a tremendous amount of healing from reading the book.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah.
I'm excited. So the book, ladies and gentlemen, is called It Begins With You. It's on Amazon and most places out there. You can get that right now. And also the podcast, Jillian on Love. So if you enjoy this conversation, go to Jillian on Love and check that out on Spotify and Apple. And you can stay tuned. Then also Instagram. As I said, Jillian, I was checking out your Instagram, for several days in a row, and I was really enjoying the little snippets that's there. So
Thank you.
Instagram is Jillian Turecki. Okay, so
Yep.
you can find that Jillian Turecki in one word, and or Jillian on Love, which is the podcast, which has also amassed a great following now. So thank you for jumping on. I want to ask you one last question before we log off, and it's straight off the cuff. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. I want you to imagine, please, that you are now on the world stage. Every sentient being alive has gathered, tuning in, they're watching, and they're ready for you to share your message with the world. When you're ready, take a breath and do share whenever you're ready. What is your message to the world right now?
You have to let go of what you thought life was supposed to be like. And you have to now think about what's going to make your life great now. And because life does not turn out the way that you think it's going to. And you really can't spend too much time thinking about how you wish things were different. You have to think about what do you want to create now to make your life better.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
JillianTurecki.com, Jillian Turecki also on Insta and socials, as we've discussed, and be sure to pick up the book and enjoy your journey towards further self-love. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today, Jillian.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a privilege.